America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it would be because we destroyed ourselves, Abraham Lincoln.
I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them. Thomas Jefferson.
Property is surely a right of mankind as real as liberty. John Adams.
The Constitution is the guide which I never will abandon. George Washington.
Morning.
Are you there?
Yes.
Am I here? Can you hear me?
Very loud and clear.
Okay.
All right.
So
Welcome to the Patriot Lament show. This is the first hour that we lovingly call the Saturday morning wake-up call. I'm Joshua Bennett. We got Bob behind the machine there running it. We got Aaron supposed to be in, but today we have a very special guest. Oops. We have a very special guest, a friend of the show, someone that Aaron and I have been pushing his work for years now, a man that's done so much in the cause of liberty. Welcome, Mr. Richard Maybury.
Well, thank you, Josh. I appreciate those very kind words. I've been looking forward to being here again.
Well, I'll tell you, I was so excited when you asked to come back on. It's the first time someone's actually asked me to come on the show, and it's like, yay, especially you. It's fantastic. We, as listeners should know, Aaron and I have pushed your Uncle Eric series books, especially Whatever Happened to Justice and Penny Candy, because we've seen it help so many adults, not just, younger people, but my brother Aaron literally would refuse to talk to people until they read Whatever Happened to Justice. And seriously, he would just say, no, I'm not talking to you until you read this book. And then they'd read it and kind of say, oh, now I get what you're saying. Otherwise than that, it was just like talking to a brick wall.
Yeah. There's this kind of wall of ignorance that the government-controlled schools have built that keeps people from being able to understand what's happening to them. And I guess the main reason I wrote Whatever Happened to Justice is to just show people this is what you weren't taught in school, so that they have the ability to take the facts that they're seeing in the news and make some sense out of them.
Talk to us a little bit about your website and your newsletter too. I'm a subscriber. I encourage people to subscribe to that, and I think a little bit about what we talked about today you'll be able to get in the newsletter.
I mean, that's really, to me, the really hot news that's going on in the world today is the geopolitical stuff.
Yep.
Everybody's aware of what's going on in Ukraine. They may not understand it, but they know something very big has happened over there in the last few months. In my newsletter, which is called Early Warning Report for Investors, that is an attempt to make practical use out of our understanding of geopolitics, because it's my belief that the relationships between governments, and especially the military events, cause greater changes in the economy than anything else. They redirect flows of money, and they offer the greatest opportunities for some sort of financial safety, some sort of financial gain, a realistic financial plan, because they're a lot more predictable than the stuff that, for instance, the Federal Reserve and the Treasury do to us. Those things change on a daily or on a weekly, sometimes daily basis, depending on the mood that the Federal Reserve and Treasury officials are in. So whatever financial plan you have based on the assumption that the Federal Reserve or the Treasury are going to continue a given policy, that doesn't have much chance of success because those people change their minds so often. Whereas the geopolitical things, they all continually point in the same direction and have for centuries, and that direction is more war. And as long as you structure your investment portfolio on the assumption that we will just continue having more and more war, then the record shows, I mean, you make really good money off of that. It's a pathetic thing, but it's the reality. And if you recognize the reality, you've got a much better chance to be successful financially.
Along those lines, too, even if on the gain part, there's also understanding what's going on in geopolitics, and you mentioned with the Federal Reserve, it's a lot harder to figure out what those jokers are doing, but understanding what's going on in the world can also save the savings that you already have.
Yeah, right. There's two general economic trends that my newsletter is based on. One is more war, and the other one is more currency debasement, which usually goes with war. So as long as your investments are structured to be bets on more war and more currency debasement, the record shows you've got a really superb chance of not only keeping your savings, and including the buying power of the savings, but of earning really spectacular profits over the long term. Now, this isn't going to do you any good on a day-to-day basis. If you're a trader who likes to move in and out on a daily basis, it won't be a help. But if you're a person who has a long-term view, in my opinion, there's absolutely nothing better than basing your investment portfolio, your savings, your retirement savings, on the assumption of more war and more currency debasement. And to give you an example, if in 1977 you had invested in what is now Lockheed Martin, or General Dynamics. General Dynamics is now up more than 20,000% from then, and Lockheed Martin is up more than 30,000% since then. There's nothing else that compares with these kinds of investments because they are based on reality, that these crazy governments are going to continue fighting with each other.
That's nice. It's so true, though. I mean, you said opened with Ukraine and Russia, what's going on over there, and that whole scenario there is mind-boggling to me in the way that the U.S. state is so involved in it. Do you have any clue? Can you help us with what's going on over there? Because I'm interested in it for, I don't know, just because it can turn into a hot spot. I mean, why are we playing with war? And basically, sanctions are acts of war, I think. And why are we messing around with Russia? It doesn't make any sense to me. Well,
there's why. That's a very good question. That gets down to why do human beings want political power? Well, they want it because they want to use it on somebody. If you look at anybody who's in any level of politics, from the local dog catcher up to the president, these people are in that job because they want to use that job on somebody, because there's no fun in having power if you can't use it. So, I think the fundamental problem that causes war is that simply once a politician gets into a position where he has a lot of power, then he wants to use it on somebody. He also has a great benefit from the use of the power and getting into wars, in the fact that scares the population into feeling that they need a leader to protect them. And so it cements this person's grip on power to have an exterior enemy who is always pushing. Some of the Greek philosophers used to talk about that one of them, I think it might have been Plato, said that once the tyrant has disposed of foreign enemies by conquest or treaty, then he's always stirring up some war or other so that the people will require a leader. And that's a very basic part of what goes on between governments, is they fight with each other just so that their people will require a leader. The people have got no understanding of what's really going on. They're busy with their jobs and their families, and they got to mow the lawn, got to wash the car, and take care of all of life's necessities. So they don't have time to watch what these governments are doing in other countries and to understand what's going on. And again, that comes back to my newsletter. That's my job, is to try to help people understand these things that affect them so profoundly. But, as far as the why do these things happen, they happen because they benefit the governments that get involved in them. And right now you can see that going on. Obama made the comment a couple weeks ago. He said, "Why does everybody want to use military force?" And he said that rhetorically.
Yeah.
He's running into this fact that he's surrounded by people who want to use military force, and apparently he's too naive about politics to understand what's really going on there. And then all these people in Washington are there because they want power, and when they get into a position of power, they want to use it on somebody.
Yeah. Well, he's been doing a pretty good job using it himself, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. He's not into the military stuff as much yet, as an awful lot of presidents have been. He's more interested in wrecking the medical care system. But yeah, they get in there and they have some idea about how you ought to live your life, and they're going to make sure you live it that way, come hell or high water.
I've been, I don't know, it's just that the Ukrainian crisis, or whatever, how they put it here, it's bothered me a little bit, just because, well, not that it surprises me or the hypocrisy that you watch, like maybe John Kerry get up there and talk about how Ukrainians have the right to self-determination when the United States is imposing a coup and spending $5 billion. And then when Eastern Ukraine wants to secede, it's like, oh, that's illegal. What are you doing?
Yeah, the fundamental thing, I think, that's going on in Ukraine, if you ask the question specifically, why Ukraine, what's been going on, well, let's go back to the fall of the Soviet Empire back in the early 90s. That's really where this began. You might remember, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but people my age remember that the late-night talk show hosts, when the Soviet Empire was going down, it was such a source of jokes about the Soviet Union. The late-night talk show hosts would do these stand-up comic skits talking about how awful the Soviet Union was and it's a big failure, and just laughing, getting the audience to laugh at the Soviets. And the Soviet Union became this laughing stock all over the world, as everybody was telling jokes about it. Well, it was a horrible humiliation for those people. They know that their experiment had failed, and it was no fun having the whole world laugh at them. And that kind of set the stage for where we are now. The whole 1990s decade was just awful for the Soviet people. They really went through hell over there, and some of them were starving, and people were laughing at them. So it built up this fear of the outside world that they already had from World War II. The Soviet Union underwent what was probably the worst invasion in all of the history of mankind during World War II, even worse than when the Mongols invaded them. They lost 20 million people. The typical, it's often been said that in World War II, every Russian knew somebody or was related to somebody who got killed in that war. Every Russian took a loss. Either they died themselves or they lost someone they cared about in that war. It was the most horrible experience probably that anybody has ever experienced in history. And so they were already very badly burned from World War II, and then their system falls apart on them in the 1990s, and so they're all paranoid, and justifiably so. And these invasions of Russia during World War II came from the West, from the western part of Europe into Russia. The countries today that are part of NATO, the key countries like Germany, for instance, were the invaders of Russia during World War II. So when the Russians look west, what they see is the people who invaded them in World War II. And these are the same people who were laughing at them in the 1990s. So they're just absolutely paranoid nuts, and they are willing to back anybody who will protect them against encroachment from the West. The West is NATO. Come to think of it, maybe we should talk a little bit about NATO. There may be a lot of listeners who aren't really aware of what NATO is.
Yeah.
You want to go into that?
No, I think that's a good idea because that plays a huge part.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, America right now is dancing to the tune of NATO, and so we really need to understand NATO. And NATO means the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and that's 28 countries. It's or 28 governments. The government of the U.S. and of Canada, and 26 others that are in Western Europe. Now, in the 1940s, that's when the Soviet Union was becoming a big threat to the West, and so these governments, these 28 governments, well, actually there was only about a dozen of them at that time, came together, formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for the specific purpose of uniting against Moscow. They were scared of Moscow, and they were uniting to try to put up a solid front against Moscow. And that's what NATO was created for, was this military alliance that would protect the Western countries against Russia or against the Soviet Union. And that in the years since, NATO has become sort of a government all to itself. It's an entity all to itself, a bureaucracy that wants to maintain itself, that wants to earn more money in whatever way it can. It's a government bureaucracy, and it wants to grow like any other government bureaucracy. And so it wants to expand, and that's what it's been doing ever since the Soviet government fell in the early 90s. NATO has been inducting, let's say, more countries. And so you start out with these NATO countries that are primarily Germany, France, and England in the far west of Europe, and they start taking on more and more allies, and therefore NATO has been moving eastward toward Russia for almost 25 years. And that frightens the Russians. When the Soviet Empire fell apart, I mean, their military fell apart, everything fell apart, and they were basically helpless. And for 25 years since then, NATO has been moving in their direction, inducting more and more countries to the point where there used to be a corridor of buffer states between NATO and the Soviet Union, and those were what were called the Iron Curtain countries: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania. That line of countries down the middle of Central Europe were these buffer states that the Russians saw as a protection against NATO. Well, NATO now has inducted all of those countries into NATO. So the buffer states are gone. And in 2006, I believe it was, they finally started inducting Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which are right on the Russian border. And that just increased the fear even more, to the point where by the time Vladimir Putin came in 2000, the Russians were ready to vote for anybody that would protect them against NATO. And he's been, very popular most of the time since then. And boy, is he popular now.
Yeah.
Because Ukraine, NATO started working toward inducting Ukraine into NATO, and the Russian people felt like somebody's got to draw a line someplace. And so the first line was drawn in Georgia to the south of Russia, and that was in 2008. And I would like to take credit for that. I predicted that in my newsletter, that the Russians would try to move into Georgia, which they did. And now Ukraine has become the center of attention because NATO was trying to induct Ukraine. And so the Russians are just trying to grab as much of, let's say, create as much buffer state out of the real estate that's left that they can. And there's this relentless drive in Russia among the population to get some sort of protection against this oncoming NATO, which has been expanding toward them for 25 years. So, the West has taken this Russian annexation of parts of Ukraine as some sort of act of aggression, where the Russians just see it as an attempt to protect themselves from NATO. Again, NATO, is now the tail that's wagging the dog, because Washington is a member of NATO and that it's their primary alliance. They think they have some sort of obligation to just support NATO no matter what NATO does. It's crazy.
Wasn't NATO at the, I don't know if I have this right, but at the end of the fall of the Soviet Union, didn't they kind of make an agreement that NATO wouldn't expand east?
I don't know if it was stated explicitly in terms of, we will not induct Poland and Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. I don't think there was a promise about specific countries, but there was a statement of intent that we won't do anything aggressive toward you. But then, obviously they have. And
that was too boring.
Yeah, really. Maybe that's what it was. They just got bored. I don't know. But that's what government bureaucracies do, is they grow. And NATO is a government bureaucracy, and it has grown. And it has inducted these buffer states that gave the Russians a feeling of security. And now that feeling of security is gone, the Russians are scared. And the stupid thing that's going on in Washington, one of the many, many stupid things, is that they seem to think that the way to solve this problem is to increase Russian anxiety. And so they have moved paratroopers into these states that used to be the buffer states. There are now U.S. paratroopers in Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland. Well, now, and I'm writing about this in the next newsletter, in the June issue of Early Warning Report. The Americans don't see anything special about paratroopers. That's just soldiers that drop from the sky with parachutes, and so what? That's just another form of military action. But in World War II, paratroopers were used very often as the spear point of a blitz. And what a lot of European mothers and fathers experienced was that they would be at home on a bright, sunny, clear day, and everything is like it normally is, and they'd look out the window to check on how their kids are doing, as parents always do all over the world, and they would see paratroopers dropping into their gardens. And in, a minute or two, suddenly their kids would be out there trapped in a gun battle between these paratroopers and the domestic troops. And this happened continually all over Europe for the whole war. Paratroopers meant a kind of terror that most parents cannot possibly imagine. and they would just drop out of nowhere and land right there in your yard. What the U.S. has gone and done, what Washington has done, is put paratroopers in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland. You can imagine how that plays in Russia.
I never, when I read that they had sent paratroopers, that boggled my mind, because that really, I was, paratroopers, why? That seems so old school. And then now the way you put it, it might just be just to stir fear.
Yeah, that's what it's for.
Wow.
It can't be for anything else. And you couldn't hardly do anything in Europe that would scare people more than moving paratroopers close to them. It's, again, Americans have no experience with that. They don't know anything about how Europeans feel about paratroopers. But in any place in Europe where paratroopers were used in World War II, you will find the people are scared to death of them.
That's amazing. Wow. I've also seen that, they're ratcheting it up. They're sending, or the United States has been sending warships into the Black Sea.
Yeah.
And cruising around Crimea. It's just...
Yeah.
We wonder why the Russians are scared. It's pretty obvious.
That's another thing that you're never taught in your government-controlled schools, is nobody ever shows the kids a map of the Western powers and their allies during the Cold War. Russia was pretty much entirely surrounded by enemies. The only place where they really didn't have strong enemies was the Arctic, where there's nothing but ice. The rest of it, they were surrounded by enemies. And, you're looking at their history from World War II, they had experienced the worst invasion in world history. And then, along comes the 1940s after the war, and they're just gradually entirely surrounded by enemies who are waving nuclear weapons at them. And yeah, they went crazy, who wouldn't under those circumstances? So there's this thing in the West. Well, it's actually pretty common to all governments. It's never let your population see things from the other guy's point of view. Always paint everything that happens in terms of a Hollywood movie. Good guys against bad guys. Russians are bad guys, Americans are good guys. So anybody who's allied with Americans must be a good guy. And that's how the whole population was taught to think. And nobody ever would show people a map and say, well, how would you feel if you were entirely surrounded by people who are threatening to nuke you?
Yep. Yeah, that's one of the things that I appreciate about Ron Paul in the presidential debates. And he'd say, what if China had a brigade of soldiers at the border of Mexico, on the American border of Mexico? What do you think we would freak out a little bit? Yeah. Ron, as far as I know, Ron is the only guy who's ever been in Congress who has suggested that people try to see things from the other side's point of view. Mm-hmm. You don't have to love the other side. You don't have to agree with them, but at least try to see things the way they do. And you do that in your daily life all the time. If you have some sort of a problem with another person or some sort of disagreement, whatever, you always say to yourself, well, gee, am I in the wrong maybe? And you try to see things the way he tries to see them. It's just good manners, among other things, but not in international relations. In international relations, it's a Hollywood movie, good guys against bad guys. And the population has never been trained to think any other way. Well, they have, they have the whole media, the U.S. state does on their site, even all the radio talk shows. It makes my ears bleed when I listen to them, like Sean Hannity or even Glenn Beck, who claims he's a libertarian now. And yet at the same time, they're turning around saying, look at Putin. He wants to conquer the world. And he hasn't conquered anyone. I mean, we're all over the world, the United States is all over the world, conquering state after state after state, building up bases, 1,000 of them, 1,000 bases over the world, and constantly threatening everyone that doesn't go lockstep with us, and yet Putin's trying to take over the world.
I don't want our listeners to think that we are painting Putin as a nice guy.
No.
No, I mean, he is not a nice guy, and that is the common situation all over the world among practically every government. Is they're not nice guys.
Yep.
That's another thing that everybody's taught to believe, is that every war is a battle between good guys and bad guys, and Americans should get on the side of the good guys. Well, if you look at these wars, what you find is that practically every war is a battle between bad guys and bad guys. And one of the classic examples is World War II. Again, the movies have taught us to see it good guys against bad guys, but if you look at who Franklin Roosevelt's allies were, his chief allies were Chiang Kai-shek in China and Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union. Those were his allies. And those two together murdered way more millions of people than Hitler and the German Nazis did. So who were the good guys and who were the bad guys?
Well, if people had read your book, World War II, and how it affects you today, they would know.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
All your Uncle Eric books. I mean, it's so... anyways, I had to throw that in there because it's true. All what we're talking about, you've written about. You're right. What do you think? This is kind of a question I've been waiting to ask you. And with Russia making a turn, or it seems they are, towards China, and it seems like they're trying to build their economic ties, their military ties, and I don't know if they're just rumors, but they talk about maybe trading in rubles or the yuan or won, whatever it's called, instead of U.S. dollars. Do you think that could happen? And what would be the geopolitical effects to the United States if that does?
That could turn out to be a very big deal. This movement, it kind of centers around Moscow and Beijing. Both governments trying to move away from the dollar being the world's reserve currency. And by reserve currency, we mean the dollar is the key currency that's used for savings and trade all over the world. It's the closest thing there is at the moment to a world money. And Beijing and Moscow both want to move away from that. Now, what Washington's really doing by allowing its currency to be the world reserve currency is it is giving itself permission to print money to pay its bills, because the U.S. can simply print the world currency and use it to buy stuff. Well, if they can't do that anymore, if there's some other currency that is the money that they can't print, then the federal government is in way more financial trouble than even it already is. Its ability to print its way out of debt becomes much more difficult, and I think that very possibly if a new currency is established by Moscow and Beijing, the federal government will probably wind up. It's hard to imagine how bad things could go.
Do you think? Do you think that we'll do what we've done to the last 4 or 5 countries that have talked about stepping away from our currency? I think that's the implication that Josh was going for.
That they'll start a war.
Yeah,
the U.S. will go to war.
Right. Well,
it may be. Yeah, they'll find some other excuse. The American people won't send their sons and daughters to die for a currency crisis, but they will do it for other things.
They have in the past 10 years.
Yeah, but they don't know that.
Oh, they don't know that.
Yeah, there will be some other sort of an excuse for it. Who knows? Maybe Ukraine.
Save the Ukraine.
Yeah, they'll find some reason to convince everybody that if we don't go to war in the Ukraine, that something bad is going to happen to us. What's always been remarkable to me is ever since 9/11, and even today, you still hear people saying, if we don't go fight them over there in Iraq and Afghanistan, then the day is going to come when we're all going to be speaking Arabic.
Yeah, right.
The Muslims will invade the United States
on their goats.
So, if people will buy into that, and maybe that's something we should point out here. You're told all the time that it's a small world, and you're led to believe that means that it's a small world militarily as well as economically and technologically and all. But that's not the case. Those two oceans, the Pacific and the Atlantic, are really still very wide moats, and they make America pretty much totally invulnerable to an invasion. There's just nobody that has any kind of capacity to cross those oceans and invade the United States. So this idea that if we don't stop them in Afghanistan and Iraq, they'll be over here, that implies that the other side has huge navies to be able to cross the Atlantic and invade the United States. And they don't. Nobody does.
No. We've made the remark before. What are they going to do, ride their goats across the water?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. I remember in the Vietnam War, a lot of my friends would, after a while, after they were in the military, we'd all be talking about, does this really make sense? What we're doing here, and what kind of dawned on you is those rice farmers over there in Vietnam did not have the ability to strap their AK-47s to their backs and swim across the Pacific and invade the United States. But that was the assumption that we were fighting under, is if we didn't stop them there, that they would somehow get across the Pacific and invade California.
That's insanity.
It is, yeah, it is.
The Russians hold, I believe, quite a bit of American debt too, don't they? Or they have a lot of U.S. dollars.
Well, everybody has a lot of U.S. dollars. The whole world is just up to their eyeballs in U.S. dollars because the Federal Reserve has been printing them. I mean, that kind of gets back to the point about the dollar being the reserve currency. The way that the federal government keeps this so-called economy of ours running is by printing money and using it to buy stuff from China and other countries. Well, if they stop accepting those dollars, then suddenly the federal government is going to be printing all that money to keep itself alive, and that money is going to stay in the United States. And it could trigger off a really big inflation immediately when that happens, whenever it is. I mean, it could be an overnight kind of thing. And that's one of the reasons that I always recommend in early warning report that people have a good supply of gold and silver in their investment portfolios, because the government can't print those on a printing press.
I was going to ask you about that if you're still, I knew you were, but just for the sake of the audience, you're still pushing to have gold and silver as a commodity or as part of your savings.
Yeah, definitely. That, as I said before, one of the two key trends in the economy is currency debasement, and so those are the two investments that are first in line, let's say, to profit from a currency debasement. And they've been doing wonderfully, as long as you consider them a long-term play. then they've been fantastic. Tremendous gains there. And again, the same thing for the defense stocks. Tremendous gains as long as you're willing to just buy and hold and stop worrying about them. Just buy them, tuck them away, and forget about them. They've been doing fantastically. So, I don't know. I don't know what to say beyond that.
Well, I was just going to say, I have some friends that I've always encouraged them to buy precious metals, whatever. And they're like, well, now what do you think? Because silver's down to 20 and gold's down to 1,200, and good time to buy more.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a lot, but it's not. I mean, people's mindset is, quick gain, quick gain, and that's not what it's about. It's about survivability in the long term. Yeah,
right. The future belongs to the patient. If there's anything that the investment markets will teach you, it's that you better be patient. If you're not patient, you're going to be broke.
Well, the other thing is the price of gold doesn't really change, just the value of currency does.
Yeah.
You're never paying any more or any less for it. The value of the gold stays the same all the time.
Yeah, that's a good insight. And it's not just gold; it's all goods and services. They're not going up; the dollar is going down. Howard Ruff used to have a good comment that he would make that inflation isn't rising prices; it's falling money. And that's in fact the case. Gold and silver and automobiles and food, all the rest of it—they're not going up; the dollar is going down.
Have you heard anything about, obviously, the Federal Reserve and Yellen's been doing with their quantitative easing, they've been backing off a little bit now, supposedly only spending $45 billion a month instead of 80 or 90.
Yeah.
And I was reading something recently, might have been just this week, where all of a sudden, even though they're supposedly tapering, I think it was Denmark has all of a sudden purchased $120-some billion in securities. Have you heard anything about that? Is it possible that they're just kind of laundering it somewhere else?
I have not heard anything about that. $120 billion sounds like a lot for a country the size of Denmark.
Yeah, it was ridiculous because they went from holding, I don't remember how many billions of dollars, but it wasn't very much. And just since December, it's tripled into it was like $120 billion in 1 month, and they're up to $200 or $300 billion now. And the article I was reading was saying, maybe they tapered supposedly here, and they're pushing it off and having someone else buy the securities. I don't know. I just was wondering if you'd heard that, because that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it the government of Denmark or the people of Denmark?
Government.
Yeah, that would surprise me if it's $120 billion in the government is doing it. But who knows? That it may be that they're just acting as a front for somebody else. Mm-hmm. They're taking some sort of a handling fee. And doing the transactions for maybe the government of China or some other really big entity. And that would all be secret. There's a huge amount that goes on in the financial world. It's just completely secret, and nobody knows what's going on. You see some things on the surface, but as to who's really behind it, who knows? Any border is a creation. Is a means of creating secrecy. So, for instance, the government of Iran is an enemy of the government of the U.S., so any kind of money that an American might accumulate, if he wants to hide it from the U.S. government, he can send it into Iran and then back out someplace else, and the U.S. government will lose track of where it went because they can't follow it through Iran because the Iranian government hates them. And so any government anywhere in the world or any border anywhere in the world is a way of creating a secrecy for the flow of money. And there's, there's very little ability to track flows of money very far if the people that you're trying to track understand the geopolitics.
With that, this is something that boggled my mind. I'm hoping you might give me some insight.
Mm-hmm.
We had the QE 1, 2, 3 eternity and billions of dollars, and for some reason, I don't know, inflation doesn't seem to be crazy yet. And then we had the tapering, and I assumed that interest rates would go plowing skyward, and it hasn't really happened there either. So is it just because it's still all being manipulated?
I don't think it's being deliberately manipulated anymore. It may have at first in 2007. What I'm talking about is what's called velocity.
Right.
That's the speed at which money changes hands. If people consider some currency to be a store of value, some place where they can put their wealth and that it would be safe, then that's what they will want when they are scared. And they'll start selling other things and turning it into that money as a way of protecting their savings. And the more afraid they are, the more they want that currency, the more they will sell other things to get it, and the tighter they will hang on to it and refuse to buy things. Well, what happened was the Federal Reserve in 2007 didn't understand economics any better than they do now, and they made a lot of mistakes, which frightened a lot of investors, and a whole lot of people just sold everything that they had and converted into dollars because there were still millions of people who had faith in the dollar. And that created this tremendous demand for the dollar. So as the Fed decides that they're going to try to stop the recession by printing more money, they print it and they shove it out there into the economy, and people gather it up and refuse to spend it. And that's what's been going on ever since. It's just as if money is being dropped by the Federal Reserve from an airplane and it lands in your backyard, and you know something's wrong with the economy, so you run out there and you gather it all up, and you don't spend it. You just hide it in your garage. And they dump some more out, and you hide more of it in your garage, and so forth.
That's one of the first things whenever I get your newsletter. I don't even start at the front. I turn the pages to find where the velocity counter is. Mm-hmm. Because that's I'm always wondering, I wonder where it is now. It's still pretty low, though.
I think it's still very much in a deflationary condition right now, meaning no matter what the government prints out, as you say, they admit to printing $45 billion new dollars per month now. It used to be if they did that much in a year, that would be catastrophic. And now it's just a ho-hum deal. And yet, the public just hangs on to it and won't spend it. So there's who knows how many, but their estimates run around $2 to $3 trillion very commonly. And it's this $1 trillion that people have socked away that they're not spending. And when the day comes when they start getting confident and they start saying to themselves, I think I'm going to spend some of that, then you're going to have these mountains of money pouring out into the economy, driving up prices. And that's when you're going to be really glad you have gold and silver. Because I think that when that day arrives, a really big climb in gold and silver, like, 100, 200, 300% will be likely within 6 months.
Wow. You've even said in your newsletter that you think it's likely, gold could reach 10,000 U.S. dollars.
Yeah. I think it's pretty much inevitable that it will. The federal government has fouled things up so badly. They've printed so many dollars, and there are so many dollars piled up out there, metaphorically, in people's garages. Actually, it's in the banks. It's just sitting there in the banks, unused. When the day comes, when that money comes out and pours into the economy, look out, man. You're going to be amazed, I think, at what's going to happen to prices.
Is that something? I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, ahead.
I was just going to say, is that something that people will be able to see? I mean, because I think a lot of people think, well, when that time comes, then I'll know and I'll do A, B, or C, what you're recommending now, instead of taking steps. But that's not quite how it works, is it?
No, it'll creep up on us. It won't be obvious in its early stages. What you'll see happening is, well, for instance, the best thing to get is gold, and second best thing is silver, and then platinum, and then palladium. You also want to be buying a stock of emergency food and other sorts of emergency supplies and equipment. Those things, once the public realizes what's happening with the currency, those things will have already moved way up. Because they're going to be the early movers. They will be the indicators that there's something new afoot, and we need to react to it. So, it's easy to buy those things today when people aren't scared. When people get scared, those sorts of things are going to disappear from the market pretty quick, because the demand will be so high for them, and then it'll be too late. You'll be thinking, gee, I should go out there and buy some more gold and silver. Well, you aren't going to find any to buy because everybody's going to be hanging on.
I've always thought that from the perspective of someone that loves liberty or preaches about, freedom, that one of the best things you can do is lead by example. So when it does happen, people can look to you and say, hey, maybe that guy did know what he was talking about the whole time. Maybe we should listen to what he has to say some more.
Yeah, that's right. There's a certain credibility that you have to be, in my opinion, you have to be concerned about. If you really do care about the future, the kind of world that your children are going to live in, you have to be consistent with your beliefs about the importance of liberty. And you have to make your decisions on that basis so that other people can see. So when the day comes, when the crisis happens, you are one of the people that they look to for guidance, rather than some lunatic who's in the state capitol yelling, give me more power, give me more power.
Yeah, I've always thought it wouldn't do much good to be in a bread line and say, yeah, I saw this coming because I'm an Austrian.
Yeah, right. That's really true. I cover lots of these. As you know, you subscribe to my newsletter. I cover a lot of those things in the newsletter all the time.
Yeah.
I haven't done any stuff on actual emergency precautions recently. I guess I should do a few articles on those. But the day's coming, I think, and what's happening in East Europe could be the beginning of it. The Russians aren't going to back down. That's an interesting point. Yeah, we don't talk about very much. Are they going to back down? No, they're not going to back down.
No.
In their minds, they're protecting their families, and they are not going to back down. So this crisis in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, that area, that's going to keep getting worse unless NATO backs off, which they're not going to do.
No, everyone's got to win. I mean, their legitimacy or whatever in their own minds, I guess. But you pointed out earlier, Russia's not going to back down because they've lost too many people over the course of their whole history. They've lost millions and millions of people just in the last 100 years, 70 years, 20 million during one war. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anyone can blame them for not wanting to have that happen again. Yeah,
they're scared. And who could blame them for being scared? They've seen this sort of thing so many times in their history. There's nothing, that's the thing, there's nothing new about any of this to a Russian. They expect to be invaded. And NATO acts like force that plans to be the invader. It's been coming at them for 25 years. So, yeah, they're behaving what is in their minds in a very logical fashion. Incidentally, I would imagine there are some of the listeners that would be interested in seeing a copy of the early warning report. Could I give some information on that?
Absolutely.
We've, normally we don't give things away free. The newsletter, the last two issues, the April and the May issue, we're really on this point, and the future ones will continue to be on this point of geopolitics being the driver of changes in flows of money. And we have an extra supply of those available. If you'll send $10 for the shipping and handling, we can make both of those available to you free for the $10. The phone number you would call is 800-509-5400.
Richard, I hate to interrupt you, but we got about 10 seconds, but we'll pick that up as soon as we come back from the break.
Okay, sounds good.
Sorry about that.
Very good. No problem.
All right.
Don't touch that dial. Fairbanks is listening. 660 AM, KFAR.
If you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go from us in peace. We ask not your counsels or your arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. Samuel Adams.
The time is near at hand, which must determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves. George Washington.
And what country can preserve its liberties if its rulers are not warned from time to time that this people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Thomas Jefferson.
Posterity, you will never know how much it cost the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that ever I took half the pains to preserve it. John Adams.
I sincerely believe that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies, and that the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale. Thomas Jefferson.
Government is instituted to protect property, this being the end of government. That alone is a just government, which impartially secures to every man whatever is his own. That is not a just government, nor is property secure under it, where arbitrary restrictions, exceptions, and monopolies deny to part of its citizens that free use of their own faculties. James Madison.
It would be an absurdity for jurors to be required to accept the judge's view of the law against their own opinion, judgment, and conscience. John Adams.
Whenever the legislators endeavored to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any further obedience, and are left to the common refuge which God hath provided for all men against force and violence. John Locke.
It is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here, idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but for me, give me liberty, or give me death. Patrick Henry.
My people perish for the lack of knowledge. God.
Welcome to the Patriot Lament Show, hour number 2. I'm Joshua Bennett. We got my bro, Aaron Bennett, who's almost like a guest because you're never here. But you're not really a special guest.
Oh, well, I am special.
That's another show.
For?
Today we have a very special guest on with us, a friend of the show.
Somewhat of a rock star.
I'd say he's a huge rock star, at least to you and I. Doesn't matter what anyone else thinks.
Pretty much.
No, a rock star in the liberty movement, Mr. Richard Maybury. Richard, are you still with us?
I sure am.
We're always kind of nervous because we're not pros on this side. We lose people all the time. Anyways, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Why don't you start over on that with the and give us that phone number? And again, this is Richard Maybury. He's the man that coined the phrase chaos stand. And you can actually on Patriots Lament on our website, you can just click on his name. It'll go straight to his website. Or you can, I think the easiest, the easiest way to find you on the internet is just to Google your name.
Yeah, probably so. It's Richard Maybury.
Yeah.
The newsletter website is richardmaybury.com. You can also Google Early Warning Report or go to earlywarningreport.com. But for the good deal here on the newsletter, you get 2 issues. That's a $60 value for just $10 by calling 800-509-5400. Again, that's 800-509-5400. And you'll get the 2 most recent issues of Early Warning Report, and both of them are about geopolitics, especially that we've been talking about here lately. There is economics and investments and finance in there too, but some very important articles on the geopolitics and again what you weren't taught in school that will help you understand what's happening to you and your money. Again, the 800-509-5400.
Great. And I strongly suggest people do get it because the next time we have you on as a guest, they can actually understand what we're talking about.
I actually found you by Googling the word juris naturalis. I'd made the comment to a guy that I was a classical libertarian, or a classical
Liberal,
liberal, right? And he said, I'm a juris naturalist. And I was like, oh, that sounds really stupid. What is that? So I Googled it, and then it actually Google credits you with actually inventing that. And so I had to figure out who this guy was and thinks he can invent words. And that's how my journey to finding you started.
Oh, well, that's good to know. I didn't know that Google was crediting me for that.
And dozens and dozens of whatever happened to Justice books later, we finally got you on our radio show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much.
You know, I've told this story before. I went through Aaron did too with his children, but we went through whatever happened to Justice. I'd have the kids read 4 chapters, and then after they read the chapters, we'd get together and talk about we'd read those 4 chapters again together, but we'd go through them and talk about what you had written in there and the significance in it. And it was really awesome to see their lives or their eyes light up when they got it. I mean, there's like, oh, I understand this now. And the one story I love to tell is when we went through whatever happened to Penny Candy, and at one point, I think he was 13 or 14 at the time, my son said, Dad, you realize these jerks are stealing from us through inflation. It's another tax, and people don't even know it. They're taxing us without even knowing it. That's fantastic.
Yes, very good. Very nice. I love to hear those kinds of stories. That it's interesting to me whenever I hear a story like about Penny Candy, because that was actually, even though that's the second book in the series and whatever happened to Justice is the 3rd book, and I think there's 11 in the series, Penny Candy was actually the first one that I wrote, and I was still a teacher at that time, And the way I would write it is I would ask myself, what aren't these kids being taught that they need to know about, especially about, it was about economics in those days. And I would write letters to the class, and I would let the class read them, and I would let them give me feedback on what it was they understood or didn't understand, and different ways to explain things. And so the kids actually were the editors of whatever happened to Penny Candy. And they taught me how to write so that the typical person can read it and understand it and enjoy it without having to really work very hard at it. And that worked really well, and I just carried that out through the rest of the books, using what my high school students had taught me.
That's fantastic. I did not know that. And it's a good thing you did it at the time frame that you did, because if you did it now, you'd be calling us from a jail cell.
Yeah, right. Probably so. Yeah, good. Teaching these kids all this subversive stuff, about what the government is really doing to them. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding.
Probably. Yeah.
Teaching them about the founding of the nation and the original founding and the intent of the founders. That would just be horrible.
Yeah. To dare to mention that the founders regarded political power as inherently evil. Maybe you would get thrown in jail for that today. I don't know.
Definitely in a school scenario. Aaron, were you going to ask him something?
I was just, you made the comments about gold and silver, and then made the comments about some survival food and this and that. Mm-hmm. And I definitely see the wisdom in getting some gold and some silver. But for the average family, it's just, you think real time. Fairbanks, Alaska has 75,000 people in, just in the greater area or whatever. Mm-hmm. So realistically, 75,000 people aren't going to buy some gold and silver, or can even afford to, for that matter, or at least enough quantity for it to be a viable commodity, right? Doesn't it make more sense, because since you can't eat gold and silver, to start the other way around?
You apparently have some savings. You most people have been able to save some money, and you don't want that hard-earned money to go away. And so, in my opinion, you should keep some of it in a form that the government cannot print into worthlessness. Now, anything you got that is denominated in dollars, for instance, a bank CD, the government can print that into worthlessness, and they probably eventually will.
So you're more talking as as savings and investment, rather than as a survival means, buy gold and silver. I mean, if you're going to save some money, put some money aside. Let's say you're saving for retirement. You have $100,000 in the bank or you got an IRAs or whatever. You should put it into gold and silver.
Not all of it. You should scatter it around. You should diversify.
Sure,
always
right.
Diversify. But yeah, some of it definitely. I would be very comfortable telling anyone to keep at least 20% of their savings in gold and silver. But as far as using it during the crisis for trade, whether that happens or not will depend on how the public comes to see gold and silver coins between now and then. If we ease into this and you just see the value of the gold and silver coins rising month to month along with the government's printing of the money, then I think probably there will be, during the crisis period, a great willingness to accept the gold and silver, because people will realize that it kept its value in the face of the government's monetary manipulation. But if it's just like an overnight thing where, let's say, Moscow and Beijing announce they're no longer going to accept U.S. dollars, that they want something else in trade for their goods and services, And suddenly you just wake up one morning and there's this global flight from dollars, which is a very real possibility. It's getting closer every time something gets worse in Ukraine. I think that in that case, Americans will not have learned about gold and silver, and you don't know what's going to happen. You're just going to have to see it as a store of value that will still be valuable when the crisis is over. And you're going to just be in a barter situation.
Right. So for a person with lower means available to them currently, they shouldn't be taking every extra dime they have and going and buy some gold and silver. That was kind of my point. I mean, their money's
not
probably
every extra, no.
Their money's probably better spent on something more tangible, like, I don't know,
food,
dried apples or something.
Yeah.
Something much more delicious, I guess.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely food should be the number one thing on your list, especially living where you do. You really are dependent on imported food, and so it's important for you to be able to get by on your own without the railroads or the highways being able to supply you for some period of time. And I would say everybody should have at least a 6-month supply of food to carry them through. You just don't know what's going to happen. And then, for your savings, at least 20% in gold and silver. And a very good thing to buy is the old silver dimes that were minted before 1964. You might want to write that down. Dimes minted before 1964. They are 90% silver. And back when I wrote Whatever Happened to Penny Candy, they were recognized that way. And Americans knew that those old coins minted before 64 contained 90% silver. And there was a demand for those coins because of that. They understood. There are still a lot around who do understand that, and they do have a lot of those silver dimes. And if you go to a coin shop, you can buy them. And they are the thing that is most likely to go into circulation as money during the crisis. And also the silver quarters and half dollars minted before 1964. Same thing. Minted before 65. So the 64 coins are still good. Everybody, in my opinion, should have some of those coins, and they will work both as carrying you through the crisis to preserve the value of your savings, and then hopefully during the crisis too. But we don't know about that. There's a lot of experts that suggest that a very good form of money to have during the crisis would be 22 caliber cartridges. Mm-hmm. And just consider every 22 caliber cartridge to be worth about a dime. You should have some big supply of them for trade. Especially living where you do, there could be a big demand for cartridges just to supply meat, put meat on the table.
There is right now, Richard. You're hard pressed to go to any of the stores here and find a 22 caliber, 22 long rifle cartridges, because as soon as they show up, they're gone.
No kidding.
Yep, and the local stores here actually have imposed their own restrictions to where once they get their supplies in, they only allow each customer to buy 2 50-round boxes apiece.
Wow, is that right? I didn't realize. I wonder if that's just local to Fairbanks, or...
I heard it's nationwide.
Is it really? Wow.
I still have
going on so many years. Yeah. That's amazing to me.
Locally here, and we're not real big, but we're, like Aaron said, about 75,000 to 100,000 people in the area, which is a very broad area. Mm-hmm. But ammunition in general is non-existent. As soon as a shipment comes in, it's gone. Within the same day it comes in. I mean, somebody will call up a local talk show and say, Sportsman's Warehouse just got a shipment of ammo, and it's gone.
Wow. I wonder if that is still because of Obama. As soon as he came in, people became afraid that their guns and ammunition were going to be confiscated, and there's been a shortage of guns and ammunition ever since.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, every time that idiot makes some sort of a comment about confiscating guns or guns are bad in one way or another, there's this big run on guns and ammunition because people are afraid that he's going to take them all away and they won't be able to buy anymore.
He's been great for the industry, that's for sure.
Oh, you aren't kidding. Boy, if you invested in Ruger, whoa, boy, that has been a great stock because of Obama. He accomplished exactly the opposite of what he intended to do.
Yeah, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's a really good demonstration of the effectiveness of government. It's so good at accomplishing the opposite of what it's trying to do.
There are unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that gun sales, weren't they, Aaron, help me out here, they're like up for the last couple of years, 300% almost every month. They go up from the month before.
Yeah. What's amazing to me is I've been doing some research on Switzerland lately, and there'll be an article on the importance of Switzerland in the next early warning report. But what I learned is that the Swiss are famous, and they've been famous for centuries for being armed to the teeth. And Americans now are more heavily armed than the Swiss are.
Wow.
Because they keep running out and buying guns every time their president says something about taking away guns.
That brings up something that I'd like to ask you. Do you have an opinion or a thought on the U.S. kind of, I don't know if they're necessarily capital controls, but like with the Swiss right now, they've got a couple banks that have agreed to pay the U.S. government fines for hiding, taxable money, and it sounds like the U.S. has put so much pressure on the Swiss government and Swiss banks that's basically not going to be a safe haven anymore.
Yeah, right. That I used to keep some money in Switzerland to try to protect it, but I don't have any there anymore. I took it out a long time ago because as soon as 9/11 happened, all the privacy in the world just went away, and the government can, if they want to go to the trouble, they can find out pretty much everything that everybody has and thereby steal it. So the value of an offshore bank account to me is pretty close to zero. The pressure that's been put on Switzerland is, to me, one of the great atrocities in world history over taxes, because the Swiss have this long tradition of financial privacy, where if a Swiss banker releases information about your money to any other government, he can be thrown in jail. So what people all over the world have known for a long time is that when they live under a tyrannical government, the way that to get out of that country and move someplace else most easily is to first get their money out. And they always, when they want to escape from a place like, let's say, Iran or China or whatever, they just want to get out and start a new life somewhere else. I mean, the whole American population is descended from people who did exactly that. The way to do it is first get your savings out of the country and then move to that new place and start over there. If you can't get your money out, then it makes it extremely difficult to move your family out. So the Swiss have always, because of this tradition of banking privacy, have always been this secret doorway that people living under tyranny could use to escape from the tyranny. In World War II alone, there's no telling how many hundreds of thousands of Jews' lives were saved because they were able to get their money into Switzerland before they fled from Nazi Germany. Well, that banking privacy can also be used by people who are trying to keep their savings from being stolen by tax collectors, and which, millions of people did all over the world. And now these governments, led by Washington, have essentially shut down the Swiss banking privacy, which means they have slammed the door on all these millions and millions of people who need that privacy to escape from these countries. So there's some very large number, we can't count them, but we know there are probably hundreds of thousands or millions of people who are living in tyranny and possibly being killed because they can't escape from those countries because they can't use Swiss banking privacy anymore.
Wow.
And these governments are sacrificing those lives just to get their hands on the tax money.
And very little tax money in comparison to what you're talking about.
Yeah, right. Right.
I think not only have they been doing that, but I think it's called FATCA. I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but basically the U.S. is trying to make it just about impossible to open up a foreign bank account for an American, period.
Right, yeah, that's another way to try to get the hands on the tax money. They are so desperate. Their financial situation is so horrible. I mean, they've got themselves into such a deep hole. They're doing anything they can to get more tax money, and that's another reason you've got to be so savvy with your savings, because believe me, the thing to keep in mind is that in order to buy votes, politicians have offered to give so many free goodies to so many people that they have essentially, in the United States, promised to confiscate and redistribute everything. All of the buildings, all of the land, all of the cars, all of the food, all of the money, everything in the United States they have pledged to steal and pass out in order to buy votes. Well, they're not going to do that. That's just not going to be physically possible to do. So they're in an impossible financial situation, and they are going to steal as much as they absolutely can before the whole thing breaks down. And you've got to be aware of that when you're planning your finances, your savings, to be able to stay ahead of that theft process that the federal government has locked itself into.
I think a lot of people would probably look at that. Most people in America don't have Swiss bank accounts, so they say, well, who cares? And then, of course, they're not thinking about the reason that you just brought up. And most people aren't going to don't want to set up a foreign bank account, so they say, who cares? And not realizing that the reason those things are happening is because of what you just said. The government is broke, they're desperate, and they're shutting the doors for money to be able to escape their imaginary borders. And once they get all those doors shut, then they're going to start grabbing.
That's right. You've got it exactly right. That's the plan. I think it's very clear, and you have to, it's all understandable when you realize they have promised to steal and redistribute everything.
That's disturbing. What about do you think that because I know we've seen this in other countries where they steal people's retirements and stuff like that. That's definitely a possibility here, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's another reason to stock up on gold and silver coins, whatever else that you can that you can hide. A good way to do it is with a coin shop. Just walk in with cash and buy your gold and silver coins with cash. Take them home and hide them. But the day is coming. I mean, you make no mistake about it. The day is coming. They're going to try to steal everything you have because they have promised what they can't deliver in order to buy the votes. It is a catastrophic situation, and one of the things that I think a trap that a lot of people fall into is they think, well, I'm going to get my money out and put it in another country. Well, every other country is in pretty much the same situation. They've all gone heavily socialist. Their politicians have all gotten into office by promising lots of free goodies, and they can't deliver on the promises. There just isn't enough wealth anymore for them to steal and redistribute. And the whole thing worldwide is going to come crashing down at some point.
For people that don't know, when you were talking about the pre-64s, dimes and nickels and quarters, or not dimes and quarters and half dollars, that's commonly referred to as junk silver. If you go to your local coin dealer or whatever, you can say, I need some junk silver. They'll know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the cheapest way. I mean, I'm not saying that everyone can do that, but if you have a little bit of something, a little bit of extra money that you can spend and you want to get into any kind of metal, that's the cheapest way to get into it, isn't it?
Well, I don't really know at this particular moment if it is. You simply have to shop around and see, because the various kinds of coins move up and down in value just like everything else in the world does, and you just have to buy what's best at any given moment. There are times when dimes are cheaper than quarters, for instance, and then there are other times when it's vice versa, and you just don't know. There are lots of dealers you can find on the internet all over the country that deal in gold and silver. I think they are probably the vanguard of the new breed of banker, and they may not know it, but they're headed in that direction. We're going to be back to the Middle Ages for a while, and there's going to be a need for people who can deal in gold and silver. There are thousands and thousands of gold and silver coin dealers all over the country, and start phoning some of them and getting the prices on the day you're going to buy.
I have to ask the question just because there's people that still think this, but this isn't an escapable route that we're heading down. I mean, the train's off the track, getting ready to crash. It's not like the next election we're going to change it.
Right. There's so much disorganization caused by the federal government's laws and rules and regulations. There's a really excellent book called 3 Felonies a Day.
Yep.
That explains that the typical American commits 3 felonies a day. The federal government enacts so many laws constantly, never stops, and they think it's a good thing to enact all these laws. That they've got us in a situation where all of us unknowingly commit 3 felonies every day, on average. So, are they going to dismantle all of that? Do you really think they're going to open up a session of Congress and just take a red pen to most of the laws that they've ever enacted? I doubt that very much.
Yeah.
There's just no way. What's going to have to happen is the whole federal government's just going to have to come crashing down and then be replaced by something rational.
What we have encouraged people to stop wasting their money on the political process, because you give $100 to some jackhole that wants power, and eventually, once he gets it, like you've said and proved, he's going to use it. Doesn't matter who it is. I mean, I think Ron Paul was the one exception to the whole story, which is amazing. But
well, I don't think that he was an exception. Now, Ron's a good friend of mine, and I've known him for many, many years. And I think he just never had any power that could corrupt him.
Good point.
He was never put to the test.
Yeah.
He could not make allies in Congress because nobody in Congress was interested in liberty. And so he was a man alone. with no ability to get anything done at all. So I don't think he was immune to the corrupting effects of power. He just didn't have any.
How did you guys meet?
There used to be an organization called the Eris Society, E-R-I-S, Eris Society, that met once a year in Aspen, Colorado, and this was a collection of people who were invited there because they had distinguished themselves in their work, whatever that happened to be. One of the examples would be environmental engineer or a aeronautical engineer named Paul McCready, who I understand has something like 25 exhibits in the Smithsonian. It was those kinds of people who met once a year, and Ron Paul was one of them, and I was too, and that's where we met.
So you guys are part of a secret society?
It wasn't secret. It was just basically a libertarian organization. There were some people that weren't libertarians, but they were close. Another one would be Colonel David Hackworth, who was he may have been the most decorated and most experienced American soldier in history. He was a member there. Carl Hess. There are a lot of libertarians. Ron was one of the leading lights of the thing. And it was started by Doug Casey.
Oh, that makes sense.
Doug lived in Aspen, yeah, right. And so there was a network of the professional libertarians that was formed out of that society. I think it shut down about 10 years ago or so.
So how long was that? How long ago was that?
Oh, I think it was in existence 20 to 25 years, something like that. And I think that's actually what killed it off, because I quit going because there were so many good people that I knew that I'd become good friends with who died. And every time I went there, I was more depressed. And I got to the point where I couldn't go anymore because so many of the top libertarians, just died of old age. And it was a sad experience for me. And I kind of tend to think that's what caused the whole thing to go.
That's really interesting.
So can we use you to get to Ron, or?
I don't know. It would depend on what for.
Well, we just want him on the show.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Slip you a couple of junk silvers.
Well, I don't think I'd be for hire on that.
Oh, you want us to step it up to pure silver, I see.
Yeah. Let me give it some thought. We all have a kind of a tacit agreement to protect each other, because your mailbox would be full constantly if you didn't.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I mean, we're just having fun. It would be awesome, but we're having fun, because I can just imagine you guys. I mean, you're busy enough with your own things, and then when you have the publicity, any free second you have, I imagine, is very valuable, which is why we're so grateful that you give us so much of your time here. I mean, this is...
Oh, well, thank you.
I enjoy it. Time.
I enjoy it. You guys do a good job. Can I give out the phone number again?
Yeah. Yep.
If you'd like two of the most recent issues of Early Warning Report, where we talk about the things that we've been talking about in this radio show. The phone number is 800-509-5400, and you can get those two issues for just $10. Also, our website also has a special offer on it now for subscriptions. There's about a third off, I believe, and that is earlywarningreport.com or richardmaybury.com, and also chaosstand.com. Any of those will work.
And I think people need to quit being cheapskates and not only get their own subscription, but you need to get the people that, we all know the guy that doesn't listen to us, or we had the family member that won't listen to you. buy them a subscription, because you can do it either by mail or you can do it, or they can get it digitally through an email. So just do it. I mean, you can spend a few bucks to send your brother or your nephew or somebody and get them to wisen up, or when the collapse happens, you end up feeding them. So there's your options. You're better off getting people educated on their own to understand what's going on, because this stuff is real.
Yeah, what a lot of subscribers do is they get friends and family in on it, and they all share the cost of an issue and pass it around. So it brings the cost way down to the individual, and you get a lot of your friends involved in it at the same time, and they get their precautions in place so that when the government does finally wreck everything, you've got friends around you who are also prepared, and that's the very best asset you can have, is to spread the word, get friends on board with you so that you're not alone when the big crisis finally happens.
That is important. I mean, surrounding yourself with that is important. I mean, it's, I don't know, it's frustrating the way. On a different note on that, though, so we were just talking about how when you met Ron 30 years ago, whatever it was, and the libertarian movement there, the liberty movement from that time to today, how do you feel about that? Are you encouraged? I mean, the government's in the worst position it's ever been, but that's them. That's not the American people. Are you encouraged what you see where the American people are? More of them waking up or not?
Oh yeah, I am so optimistic. You wouldn't believe it listening to what we've been talking here today, but I am so optimistic because the progress that's been made over the last 10 or 15 years is breathtaking. It's just astounding. If you had been with us, the leaders of the libertarian movement back in the 1970s or 80s, you would have been really depressed. I mean, there was no reason that we could see to expect that the American people would rediscover the system of liberty.
Do you think
that's impossible?
Is that all creditable to the information age?
It's certainly part of it. The internet has certainly been a big help. And you probably know. I mean, the internet is just kind of almost a libertarian village.
Yep.
Either some very large part of the companies and individuals on the internet are explicit libertarians, or they lean that way, or they just behave that way because it works. That's the thing about libertarianism is it works. You actually have a better life because of it, and that's a big selling point.
Yeah.
That once you understand how the system of liberty works, then at the same time you acquire the ability to use it to your advantage, and life just becomes way better. It's just. I get letters from people all the time about Whatever Happened to Justice, the book Whatever Happened to Justice. And they tell me about how much nicer their teenagers are now that they understand the two laws that are explained in that book. Their teenagers are civilized human beings all of a sudden. And it has this miraculous effect. Though it's not me that's working the miracle. They like to attribute it to me, but it's just those two laws that are what libertarianism is about. And they're easy for people to understand. The kids can grasp them immediately, and they immediately see what's wrong all around them in the high schools where they're going. And it turns them into really nice people.
And those two laws are do everything you say you will do and don't aggress on anyone's person or property.
Yeah, right.
It seems that the internet, more than being information, has just caused everybody to be able to question everything. And I think the biggest key to waking up is to question what is.
Yeah, that's true. It's so important to understand that the schools are owned and controlled by government agencies, and when you are taught in school, you are getting a laundered version of everything. If it's embarrassing to the government, you're not going to hear it.
All right, I remember back in the 80s before there was, information was your telephone that cost $100 to call somebody 100 feet away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my family was pretty liberty-minded. At the time, we thought we were. Looking back now, I would have thought we were extreme status, but
yeah.
In the most hard-leaning right people that we encountered, I never heard anything that resembles what I would consider liberty today, letting other people live their own life and so on and so forth. It was about getting our mandate pushed through because our way was the right way,
Yeah, right. The kids are taught this religious faith in democracy, in majority rule, and all of them are smart enough to eventually figure out that majority rule is mob rule, and yet they live with this contradiction in their lives for the rest of their lives unless somebody introduces them to the fact that democracy is not a good thing. And the people in the American Revolution had no interest in democracy. You will not find anything about majority rule in the literature of the American Revolution. What they were fighting for was the system of liberty, which is a totally different thing than democracy. Totally different. And in fact, you'll find, for instance, in the Federalist Papers, very strong arguments by John Jay and James Madison and Alexander Hamilton against democracy. And yet the kids are taught in school that America is a good place because it's a democracy. It's insane.
We fight for democracy. We go to war from a democracy. We had a revolution for democracy. That's what they're taught now.
Yeah, right. And look what democracy got Russia. They they had socialism, and it wrecked their country to the point where millions of them were on the verge of starvation. And so the whole Soviet Union collapsed, fell apart, and they got democracy. The West then taught them about how to have majority rule. So what did they vote for? Fascism.
Yep. Well, American democracy hasn't done much good for Iraq.
Oh, God, yes. You're right. Oh, that is such a pathetic thing. Oh, gee. All the hundreds of thousands of people have been killed because Washington thought that they ought to have democracy. Oh, my gosh. It is so horrible. And that still prevails. That wisdom, or lack thereof, still prevails in Washington, that what will make the world good is to make it all democratic. So we have majority rule everywhere. That's what's going to fix everything, is majority rule. That's insane, absolutely insane. What fixes things is the system of liberty, which is those two laws that we were talking about. Do all you have agreed to do, and do not encroach on other persons or their property. That's what fixes things. And the kids are taught nothing about it.
Right. The biggest problem with democracy is where voting gives this moral sanction, this moral mandate to people. It's like people have a problem with a police officer abusing his power, but they won't have that same problem with a sheriff because the sheriff was voted in. We, the people, did it. Everything that Hitler did was legal. Everything that Schindler did was illegal. And why is that? Because Hitler had a majority.
Yes, right. You can understand why a government-controlled school would teach kids a thing like that, because it brings more power to the government. As long as we can get a majority of the people to vote for robbing Peter to subsidize Paul, then that makes it okay. It's such a simplistic thing. I guess maybe that's what it is too. You got a good point. It's a very, very simple concept. 51% can force the other 49% to do anything they want. people can grasp that, but to understand how, for instance, contracts work and how contracts organize an economy, that takes a little more thought. Not a whole lot more, but it does take some more thought, and so it's not taught.
And one of the things I liked about along those lines of that, when you talk about higher law and point out the Nuremberg trials and what was found there, it's really, I mean, that whole trial is still really remarkable. That they said, no, there is a higher law than just political law.
Yeah. That actually brings us back to the situation in Ukraine and how it's got the possibility of wrecking the economy, of triggering off the big crisis. It was right after World War II the Nuremberg trials happened, and very quickly, we're kind of running short on time here. In one of the newsletters that you can get, if you order that sample pack of 2 newsletters, I explain what's called Westphalia, which was a set of treaties that were put together in the 1600s and 1500s, a series of treaties in which governments agreed not to invade each other's territories. And that was derived from the old common law principle of do not encroach on other persons or their property. We will not cross your border and invade your country. That's what those treaties said. Now, they were violated constantly. They were obeyed in some cases, but they weren't really as strong as they should have been until right after World War II, people figured out that they really did need to enforce that, and it was worked into the Nuremberg trials to, one of the findings of the Nuremberg trials was that the Nazis did it because they violated the treaties of Westphalia and invaded other countries, and so it would now be a international crime to invade another country. And that held pretty well between World War II and the last 10 years or so. They weren't still invaded, or there were a lot of invasions, there were a lot of wars, but the whole world was moving in the direction of believing that you should not invade another country unless there's a clear and present danger from that other country. And what did Washington do? Washington decided that because our 9/11 disaster happened, it was okay for America to invade other countries. And they went nuts running around the world invading other countries. And they threw away the treaties of Westphalia by doing that. The war against Gaddafi in Libya was probably the last straw. That was the breaking point where Westphalia was finally erased entirely by the U.S. government. And
we still believe in it, Richard. If it's the Russians doing the invading.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. It applies to them, but not to us.
Well, we do have a pretty cool acronym, U.S.A. That gives you the right to do anything.
Yeah. But anyhow, what's happened now is the whole world has awakened to the fact that the treaties of Westphalia have been erased by Washington, and that it's okay to go ahead and invade other countries, which is exactly what Moscow has started doing. And you can see it with Beijing, too. Mm-hmm. So the two largest other military powers in the world have decided that Westphalia doesn't apply to them either. So we are in a position just in the last few months with the situation in Ukraine where it's all coming to the surface now, where Washington has dismantled any chance the world had for peace, and all of these pent-up hatreds and other emotions from the hundreds of years past are coming to the surface, and these people are now starting to move out to settle old scores.
Do you think that what's going on in the Pacific with China, that's something to have a little concern about too?
Absolutely. It's absolutely. The Chinese government intends to take over the territory that it used to own, and I think they have every intention of doing it, just as the Russians do over there in Eastern Europe. Look out, people. I mean, we are in the most dangerous situation probably since 1939, when the World War II started. This is really, really big. Can I give out again the telephone number?
We're coming down in just a couple more minutes, so let's get all of your information out and before we get cut off.
Okay, if you want to know more about what we've been talking about and the things you can do about it in your own life to adapt to it and maybe even earn some nice profits from it, our phone number is 800-509-5400. You can send just $10 and get 2 of the most recent issues in the newsletter, which are right on point to what we've been talking about today. Again, that's 800-509-5400. And our website is richardmaybury.com, or you can do earlywarningreport.com or chaosstand.com. That's chaostan.com.
Yep, and you can also, if you're on the Patriot's Lament blog, we got Richard's name right there. You can hit that, and it'll go right to his website. And also, if anyone is interested in the books, they can write us an email, and we will give you Whatever Happened to Justice or penny candy for free.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, we really appreciate you, all the work that you've done. I mean, I got to tell you that when you tell us that you're encouraged from when you started to what you see now, that you're optimistic, that's a big encouragement to Aaron and I, because we haven't been in it as long as you, and we look at people and go, God, there's no hope. These people are stupid. But then you come in and you say things like that, and Ron Paul has said that he's so encouraged, and Lou Rockwell has said, man, we're so encouraged with what's going on and what it used to be to where we are now. And it's just great. And it's all because of the greats like you pushing forward and not giving up.
Well, thank you. That's very nice to hear. Yeah, I wish I could take everybody back to the beginning of the movement in the 1970s so you could see what it was like then and compare it to now. And you would be every bit as optimistic as I am. The progress in the last 10 years, I mean, the greatest ally that the libertarian cause has is the federal government, because it makes more enemies for itself every day than we could ever possibly come close to. It is wrecking the
Richard,
country.
we're coming down to the end there. I'm sorry to cut you off again, but thank you very much, and hopefully we can have you on again.
I enjoyed it very much, and I'd look forward to it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. What time we got there, Bob?
59:40. 10 seconds.
All right. Thanks for listening to the show. Thank you, Richard Maybury. We'll see you guys next week.
Fairbanks is listening. Talk radio for the interior. 660 AM. KFAR. Fairbanks.
Fox News Radio. I'm Ron Flatter. Deputies in Southern California are working on the premise that last night's drive-by campus shooting was no random killing. Part of their evidence, a YouTube video made ahead of time that may be disturbing to some of our listeners, perhaps posted by the gunman himself.
I'll take great pleasure in slaughtering all of you.
The gunman was among the 7 people killed in the shooting at UC Santa Barbara.
We do not know if he killed himself or if he died from police gunfire. The suspect got into 2 gun battles with deputies on Friday night in the Isle of these